Good evening. Wow, we have such bright lights, I can hardly see you out there. Welcome to the Lou Ruvo Center for Brain Health and Cleveland Clinic. How many of you have been here before? Oh my gosh, it's a room full of veterans. Glad to have you here, glad to have you back, and for those of you who are here for the first time, welcome. We love this room, we love sponsoring events here. I'll just tell you something very special about this room. I want you to look right up at the ceiling. See that? That is the picture that is on the front of the current catalog for the Frank Gehry retrospective at the Pompidou Center in Paris. So there's a retrospective of his work, 60 buildings. Our building was chosen as one of them. Our ceiling was chosen as the cover. And all over Paris, where they're advertising the Pompidou event, there's a picture of our building. So we are absolutely delighted with the coverage and the recognition of the tremendous architectural, iconic value that this building brings. And then, of course, as soon as they say, well, what do you do in that crazy building? We say, well, we deliver care to patients with Alzheimer's, Parkinson's, and multiple sclerosis, and we try to extend information on brain health. So we're delighted with this. Tonight, we have a partnership that I'm also very happy with. Tonight's sponsor is Harry Winston. You might know the Harry Winston Brilliant Futures program, and we think that's just a great theme for what we're doing tonight as well, which is Brilliant Futures. We have a wonderful speaker whom I've just been getting to know a little bit, and I'm very excited about hearing him. I'm also extremely grateful for the partnership with the University of Nevada. I think this has just been such a productive relationship and one that we value here tremendously. And we're very fortunate to have the Dean of the School of Medicine of the University of Nevada here with us tonight, Tom Schwenk. And Tom will introduce you to some of the concepts about the School of Medicine and our speaker tonight. Tom?
Jeff, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here, and I can't see you any better than Jeff could see you. So I assume that with that laughter, there are a few people out there. It's great to welcome all of you. On behalf of the School of Medicine at the University of Nevada and the Division of Health Sciences at the University of Nevada, Reno, I have the privilege of welcoming you to this event. This is a great event for several reasons. One is the speaker himself. I think you're going to be very excited to hear from Dr. Thomas. Very provocative, very innovative, a great thinker about elderhood. The second reason is because of the multidisciplinary nature of this. I love seeing people coming from all corners of Southern Nevada, community health organizations, volunteer organizations, residents of Southern Nevada, people who themselves are aging, people who work with those who are aging. It's the nature of what universities do, I think, in bringing distinguished speakers to speak to very important issues that touch on every aspect of life, and to bring together partners from all over the community to do this. And that leads to the third reason this is so exciting, which Jeff already touched on, which is the specific relationship between the Ruvo Center and the Sanford Center on Aging. I think this has the potential to be a fabulous partnership. It breaks down some of the north-south issues that we all know about. It shows how public medical education and health professions education comes together with an incredibly powerful and exciting and expert group of professionals here in the Ruvo Center. The Sanford Center, I think, can be a statewide resource to promote healthy aging and to promote healthy living for elders, and to relate to this incredibly powerful clinical and research enterprise here is very exciting. And with that, I will introduce the director of the Sanford Center on Aging, Dr. Peter Reed, who will introduce our speaker. And I'll just say that I congratulate Dr. Reed for bringing Dr. Thomas here and for connecting with Dr. Cummings and making this incredible event happen. So welcome to all of you. I think you'll be pleased that you attended tonight. Dr. Reed.
Good evening. I can see each and every one of you. And I'm delighted that you're here this evening with us, and I think that you really are in for a treat. Thank you, Dr. Cummings, for hosting us here at the Ruvo Center, and thank you, Dr. Schwenk, for your comments. As Dr. Schwenk said, I'm Peter Reed. I'm from the Sanford Center for Aging, and we do most of our work up north, but we are a statewide organization, so I thought I'd just share briefly our mission with you, which is to enhance the quality of life and well-being of elders across the state of Nevada through education, translational research, and community outreach. And that community outreach piece is really critical. A lot of academic centers, really just focus on the research side. But Gene Sanford, who endowed our center 20 years ago, was really committed to making sure that we were serving elders and having a high quality of life and well-being in the community. And so that's really what we're about. And we do that through collaborations like this and partnerships and helping to bring people together. And you really are in for a treat tonight. Dr. Bill Thomas is someone who, I have a bio here and I'll read it in a second, but he truly is a visionary and a leader. And I've followed his work for many years, and I can say that I honestly believe he's one of a very few handful of deep thinkers who are revolutionizing the way that we think about aging in our society and in our communities. And he's doing so in a way that enables people to live that high quality of life that I talked about, to embrace well-being and to overcome what I see in our society as really the declinist attitude or a sense of loss that comes along with the aging process, and to recognize that there's a continuation of growth and development in elderhood, just like there is in every other life stage. And that message is something that I think resonates with everyone who's aging, which, by the way, is everyone. And also a message that we need to get out there loud and in front of everyone so that we can start as a community to do everything we can to support people. So Dr. Bill Thomas is an author, entrepreneur, musician, teacher, farmer, and physician whose wide-ranging work explores the terrain of human aging. He graduated from Harvard Medical School in 1986 and is best known for his healthcare system innovations. He's the founder of a global nonprofit, the Eden Alternative, which works to improve the care provided to older people. He's the creator of the Greenhouse Project, which Provider Magazine has called the pinnacle of culture change. Dr. Thomas also developed the Senior ER model of care and is now working to transform the acute care services provided to elders. And his most recent novel, Second Wind, which he's going to be speaking about this evening, is a book to help boomers navigate the passage to a slower, deeper, and more connected life. Dr. Thomas continues to write and perform around the country and lives with his wife Jude and 5 children in Ithaca, New York. And we're delighted to have him here this evening. Thank you so much, Bill. If you'll join us, we will get kicked off.
Well, good evening, everybody. I know people who come here must say it every time, and I know you're all familiar with this building, but I just love it. It is so cool. I love the idea that the architecture reinforces an openness and a fluidity to thought, and I'm going to do my best to answer the challenge of this room with you here tonight, and I really love being challenged in this way. I'm going to start my time with you by letting you in on a little secret that I've been obsessed for a long time with a question that seems simple, but turns out to be kind of hard to answer. The question is, what are old people for? I don't know if you've noticed, but there's lots of them. I'm not sure where they come from, but they're everywhere. And the question is, what are they for? Why are they here? There must be some reason. And just to begin our time together, I'm going to give you a brief introduction into how human beings invented old age. So there's 3 great inventions: fire, the wheel, and aging. Those are the 3 greatest inventions of human history, and I would even argue that aging is bigger than the other 2. So how did human beings discover, uncover, and learn to make use of the virtues hidden inside the necessity of aging? How did that happen? And to help explain that, I want us to take, just for a minute, in our minds, take a trip back in time, I don't know how long, and across distance, I think it's somewhere in Africa. And it was a night something like this one, with a big moon hanging over the savannah. And there were stars overhead. And there was a little fire and a cluster of human beings. And if we were able to sneak up and watch and listen, the first thing that would happen is we would hear a young girl crying. And if we really paid attention, we'd know that she was crying of hunger. And the reason she was hungry is that her mother had given birth on that very day. And the birth had been difficult. And a lot of blood had been lost. And the mother only had strength enough to nurse the newborn and had not been able to gather food for that little girl. You with me? We're there. And we were there the moment that the mother of that mother picked up that little girl, held her in her arms, and gave her something to eat. And we know the name of this woman. She is the first grandmother. The first time in the history of the planet that the mother of a mother had taken a child into her arms and consoled her and fed her. And that was the moment that we as a species, as humanity, headed down this wonderful, fantastic, world-changing path of discovering, exploring, and making use of old age. In that story, the fire is nothing. The first grandmother is everything. Now, I'm going to give you a couple of pieces of evidence and a couple of little bit of research that takes this from just a story about a fire on the savannah a long time ago, makes it more real. It turns out that grandparenting has an enormous impact on the young. Research from around the world in many different cultures, and actually drawn from data from different centuries, shows that in households where grandparents are resident, the child mortality rate is significantly less than in households where there are no grandparents. I know not all of the men in the audience will believe this, but research has shown that in households where your mother-in-law is living with you, the wives are more fertile. I don't know. But, and I'm going to tell you about something called the grandmother effect. They've done research with lab rats, which you might think might not be useful in this regard, but they've done research where they've taken two sets of young rats and spoiled one set. And I think there are grandparents in the room, right? You are the certified experts in spoiling. You have a license to spoil, and you use it. So they spoiled these young rats, handled them, caressed them, gave them little blankies, and the other rats just got fed and watered. Well, then they watched them grow up. Then those rats had offspring, and they looked at the offspring of the two groups. Guess what? The offspring of the rats that had been spoiled, those offspring were bigger, healthier, more adventurous, and more willing to explore their environment than the other set. So that spoiling that you've done with these grandchildren will be felt a generation ahead in their children. Think about that for a minute. Also, human beings have taken this wonderful biology of grandparenting and enlarged it into a whole way of living, a phase of life that is called elderhood. And here I want to take a little time. I think almost all of our audience, or everybody here is American or living in America or grew up in America. And we live in a culture and in a society where the word elder and elderhood are very little used. We use terms like senior citizen or older person, but it's really elders we're talking about. And I want to explain for a minute what an elder is and what elderhood is and how it works and how it functions in our society. In our society, we imagine that adulthood lasts forever. So I don't know how many years ago you got your driver's license. I don't know, for some of you, you got your draft card. You had your first drink with your dad at the bar. You remember these things. And you were certified as an adult. And the idea in American society is you remain an adult for the rest of your life. However, that idea conflicts with the reality of our bodies and minds, and it conflicts with the wisdom of societies around the world and through history. It turns out human beings for thousands of years have reserved a part of the human life cycle after adulthood. That for thousands of years, human beings have been able to outgrow adulthood the way they outgrew childhood. And that there was a time in a person's life when they could put down the burdens and the worries and the cares of adulthood and become elders of their people. That's the history of humanity. We are living in a vicious, twisted fantasy that says you must remain an adult every day for the rest of your life. And you must be measured by the standards of adulthood every single day for the rest of your life. And if you show any evidence of slipping or sliding or losing a step, ooh, that's bad. That's very bad. And so an entire industry, an entire medical specialty, an entire academic discipline grows up that's entirely designed to measure how much older people have lost, to measure what's gone wrong, what's not working, what's broken, what's weak, what's afflicted, so that we can help people cope with their losses. That's the narrative of aging in American society. And when you understand that, you quickly realize that smart people don't want to be old. No, thanks, really, I'll stay young. It's okay. Never mind me, I'm good. I mean, the trouble is that even if you're not interested in aging, aging is interested in you. So let's unpack that a little. What does that mean? Well, the first thing it means is that older people get mismeasured. And I'll give you an example that helps explain this. I trained in family medicine. That's what I did my residency in before I became a geriatrician. And in pediatrics, there's something called the well-child visit. You might have done some of these. And you take your little kid into the doctor, and they got the tape measure and the scale, and there's a little graph. You might remember seeing that at the doctor's office, and you put the dots on the graph. Oh, yeah, he's growing good, you know, whatever the shows. And maybe certain times they take a little bit of blood work and analyze that, and they evaluate the child. Is the child growing normally? Okay? Now let's imagine that instead of taking your child in for the well-child visit, you take your 45-year-old husband into the pediatrician's office. They got the little funny giraffes on the wall. You put your husband on the little seat thing. You weigh him. You measure his head. The doctor comes in, looks at him, and he's like, wow, I am sorry, but this is bad. According to my chart, your husband is having a failure to thrive. He's getting heavier, but he's not getting taller. This isn't a worrisome sign. His blood work is a mess. I think we should put him in the hospital. We need to work him up. And that is exactly what would happen if you took a 45-year-old person and measured them according to the standards of a well-child visit. However, what do you think happens when you take an 85-year-old person in to see the doctor and evaluate that 85-year-old person by the standards of what's healthy and proper for a 45-year-old? Oh, I'm sorry, but your mom doesn't look good. No. She's got lots of things wrong with her. Look at what's happened to her. She's lost so much. Peter used this word earlier in the introduction, decline and declinism. It is declinism that defines age and aging in American society. It is notable that when you go to a birthday card rack and you look at the birthday cards, 40, 50, 60, 70, at 70 they stop joking. It's not even funny anymore. And you look at the humor that's in there and so on and so forth. It's all about making fun of the fear, making light of the fear that one is losing capacity, losing abilities, and is becoming less than what one was. So this declinism is at the root of and very closely related to something I want to spend a few minutes talking about, because it's something that affects all of you. It affects you every day. It affects the people you love, and yet it gets too little attention in our society. And that is the ingrained prejudice that is called ageism. So ageism is when we look at a person and estimate their age and then make assumptions about that person based on their age rather than on our knowledge of the person or the individual. So we are accustomed to thinking about and addressing, at least in some fashion, racism, where people are stereotyped according to skin pigmentation or other types of physical features, and sexism, where we make assumptions about a person's ability to do calculus based on their gender. Sorry, but that's not helpful. We also have a very profound form of ageism in our society, and in many ways, the roots of these things, racism, sexism, and ageism, are different. The consequences are different. However, I will say this. In American society, if you make use of racist epithets or slurs, and you broadcast racist attitudes at work, you have a problem. If you go to work and make sexist comments to your coworkers, you have a problem. If you go to work and make fun of an older person, no problem. And if you look at the media and the representations of older people, the representations often make use of very ugly, stereotyped images of age that if you translated them into religion, gender, or a race, you would never tolerate. They would never be tolerated in polite company. And I'm glad to say that. We need to do the same thing for discrimination and social criticism based on age. That's ageism. Now, why do I bring up ageism, and why do I say that it's such a big deal? Well, it's not nice to be part of a group that's stereotyped in a negative way. That's not nice. It's bad. And yet we know some things about what happens to people who are living in a society where they're subject to this kind of stereotyping. One of the really unfortunate things that happens is people will sometimes begin to internalize that public social prejudice. That will actually, they'll take it into themselves. And why not? It's everywhere they look. I made a joke earlier about girls and math. In fact, there's no evidence that boys are any better at math than girls. Why would you think there would be? But from a very early age, girls are subjected in our society to a constant kind of gentle discouragement to follow a path of mastery of mathematics, and boys are encouraged to pursue that, okay? It isn't one person calling names. It's the whole society, the school system, the TV programs, the movies. It's everywhere, all the time. It's the same in aging, and what happens in aging is people accept into themselves this declinist vision of who they are and what their capacities are. And people feel that if everybody believes it, I don't know, maybe he's right. So, let's do a little experiment. Has anybody, you can just sort of give a murmur or a shout out if this applies to you. Has anybody in this audience ever had the sensation of recalling a word and having it on the tip of your tongue but not being able to produce the word? What? You mean that's happened to you too? So the name for that, there's a name for that. It's called anomia. It's trying to find a word, looking for the word, kind of knowing that the word is there, but not being able to produce the word. In a society where old age is there's stereotypes about older people and memory and forgetfulness, I'm going to use this word and you're going to understand how I'm doing it in a minute. These senior moments, they create a lot of nervousness, a lot of anxiety, and a real feeling of, I don't like this, I got to get out of here. These senior moments are actually a very mild form of age-related anomia. Okay, that's what they really are. Now let me tell you where they come from. Buckle up for safety. You got to hear this. Turns out young people are really good at producing that word like that. And I'm simplifying neuroscience just for the purposes of my lecture, but let's just point out, young people, when they store a word in their brain, they don't know a lot, okay? They haven't experienced very much. So there's lots of room up there. And they could be like, yeah, I'll put it right here. And I'm speaking metaphorically, their filing system is really simple. And we know this because there's ways of testing this kind of thing. And we know that when we ask them to recall that word, they're like, oh yeah, I only have one filing cabinet. And they go find the word, and they're like, here's the word, okay? It turns out that if you live a long time, you've got lots of filing cabinets. And it gets even more interesting than that. You've also filed things in different places for different reasons over a long period of time. Now, when you're sitting with friends at dinner or whatever, and what's the name of that guy? Used to live around the corner. When that happens, it's actually a function or a consequence of how much you know. Now, we could live in a society where your 20-year-old grandson could be like, I can't remember the name. They could be faking this to look good, to be like us, because we know a lot. But instead, we live in a society where these kind of senior moments provoke a lot of anxiety and worry about memory. I'm going to give you two things to remember and take home. First off, this has nothing to do with memory. Of course you remember the word. It's there. It's a filing thing. And here's the thing to remember. In order to get that word, you have to activate more systems in your brain, more parts of your brain, more elements of your brain have to be pulled together to get that word. And that has an important consequence. Research has shown that young people, when they're presented with a story, do a phenomenal job when you ask them later about the details of the story. They're like, oh yes, he lived on 318 Mulberry Street. But they're actually pretty bad at getting the gist of the story. G-I-S-T, gist. Okay? They'll give you the details, but what does it really mean? How does it fit? What's the gist? You guys are actually awesome at that. The reason you're better at getting the gist of a story is that when you're recalling it into your brain, you're pulling on lots of different parts of the nervous system, the architecture of the brain, in order to pull that story together, and you're activating these different sensory and different memory networks in order to pull that together, and it gives you a broader view. You get the story behind the story. Much better than younger people. So in some ways, compared to older people. Young people are neurologically disabled. And we can say that because let's imagine all the tests you did on young people were for gist, and for, kind of pulling together these patterns and recognizing them. I'll give you one more example and then I'll move on. They've done research where they've looked at showing young people and old people patterns of numbers. And what do you know? Young people are very good at seeing a pattern in numbers that are being displayed. They pick it up really fast and they can tell you what the pattern is. Older people completely wax them when it comes to saying there is no pattern. So the young brain jumps ahead, has a very simple filing system, sees patterns even when they don't really exist, and the good news is we outgrow it. Now, this brings me back to, what are old people for? Old people are needed for their brains. It's not their prostates. It's not their knees. It's not their challenged hair follicles. That's not the important part of the old person. The important part of the old person is the brain. To get a brain like yours, you have to live a long time. It takes decades to create a brain like yours. And the great tragedy is that we live in a society that takes this extraordinary discovery of age, grandparenting, elderhood, and demeans it. We live in a society that takes these incredible abilities, like gist, and demeans them, and actually values instead the ability to calculate numbers quickly in your head, as if I can't buy a $3 calculator that can do that even faster than the young person. It turns out it's the brain that's the valuable thing, that is the precious resource. And in that brain is an abundance of lived experience. And I'd like for a minute to shift from sort of cognitive thinking to feeling for a minute. Because if what I'm saying is true, there should be some evidence that the older brain develops and becomes enriched with age and time, not just on the cognitive level, but on the emotional level. It turns out that there is. There's a wonderful, fascinating, I think incredible academic, a woman named Laura Carstensen, who, if I ever was reincarnated, I would want to be reincarnated as her, because she does really brilliant research. And she got interested in the question, does our experience with emotion change with time, over the decades of life? Okay? Is that true? False? Who knows? She studied it. And I won't go into how she did the research, but let me summarize her results for you. It turns out there are important age-related differences in emotion. The first thing to understand is that young people spend more time in bad moods than old people. Contrary to the conventional cultural grumpy old person motif, and I have to say, anybody who's had teenagers in the house actually knew this already. But young people spend more time in bad moods and less time in good moods than old people. But there's something more to this. The bad moods in young people last longer, and the good moods are shorter. And this led Laura Carstensen to believe that there was actually a better regulation of emotion in the aging brain. that we actually got better at modulating emotion as we get older. So she asked the question, does this change from the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, and 90s? Turns out the people living in their 90s are the best at this. Even better than people like me. I happen to be in my 50s. I have a long way to go in developing my emotional maturity and the ability to personally regulate my own emotional state. All right, here's the next thing she looked at. There is an emotion which everybody, I think almost everybody in this room is familiar with, called poignancy. Poignancy. Poignancy is when you feel happy and sad at the same time. Anybody in this room who's ever walked a daughter down the aisle at a wedding? Poignancy. Okay? Anybody who's dropped a kindergartner off her first day of school? Poignancy. Well, older people are so much better at poignancy that it's almost an emotion that doesn't even exist until midlife. And in fact, I taught med students for a long time. I presented this research to medical students in talking about this. And they've said to me, wait a minute, Dr. Thomas, do you mean you can feel good and bad at the same time? They don't even recognize it as a possibility. And yet we can measure it, and we can see that the ability to experience poignancy increases across the decades. It's beautiful. Last thing about the brain, and then I'm going to shift gears a little to culture. Last thing about the brain is that our culture tells us that the really happy people in our society are the young people, and the really sad people are the old people. And why are the old people sad? Because they're old. Why wouldn't they be sad? They're not young. But once again, it turns out that if you strip away the ageism and the stereotyping and the prejudice, it turns out that older people, by and large, are happier than young people. In fact, they've described what they call the U-bend. Very young people generally tend to be pretty happy. Then you grow up. And the unhappiest decade, according to the research, is the 40s. Yeah, a lot of people going, yeah, do not want to do that again. The unhappiest year is 47. Some people are thinking right now, And then what happens is people edge out of their 40s and into their 50s, they start getting happier. So when we look at the happiest decade of human life, it's actually the 70s. And remember, I'm talking about big studies, not individuals. So some individuals have a sad 70s, but actually mostly people are pretty happy in their 70s. The 80s are very close behind, also pretty darn happy. So how can it be when in fact we have these brains that they endure for decades, that they become more complex in how they handle information, how they sense patterns, how they learn not to be deceived by the absence of patterns, how they learn to get the gist of a story or a situation faster and more accurately than young people? How is it that those brains, which are actually happier than young brains, that are actually have greater emotional regulation and control, how does it happen that we live in a society where people don't want to grow old? What is up with that? And that's where, to get that answer, we have to leave biology and neuroscience behind. Because the answer isn't in here, the answer is out there. It's the culture. And in fact, we're living in a society that we're living in a society that is afflicted with the malignant enlargement of adulthood. The problem in American society is not age, it's not aging, it's not elders, it's not elderhood. The problem is adulthood. And the problem is that adults are out of their minds. That's the problem. And I'll show you how and why. We're living in a society that the culture of our society has been shaped to a very large degree for the last half century by a big generation of people who were born after World War II. You might have met some of them. You might know a few of them. This generation is so compact and so big that as it has moved through the life cycle, it has magnified and amplified each phase of life it's been in. So, for example, I say to you, 1960s, you immediately think of tear gas and protests. You immediately think of social upheaval. And why wouldn't you? Imagine the raging hormones of 80 million adolescents struggling to get out of childhood into adulthood. It had a huge impact on our society. Now, imagine that 80 million strong generation leaving adolescence and entering into adulthood. What happened? Now, the conventional answer is, nothing happened. Everybody settled down and got a car payment. They bought wingtip shoes. They took the kids to school and went to soccer practice. That's actually not correct. What happened is that generation began to amplify and magnify adulthood. Now, I'll give you an example of what I mean. In the 1970s, one of the best-selling books in America was Be Here Now by a writer named Ram Dass. In the 1990s, the best-selling book was The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. Sold 25 million copies. And what it said is, life is about production, performance, efficiency, effectiveness, and you are to be measured by how diligent and focused you are. And it is so important that you have to build these habits so that you don't slip up even for a minute. You will be measured. You will be quantified. You will be thrown into a ravenous adulthood that knows no limits. Faster, cheaper, more. That's what the adulthood that was created by the baby boom generation, that's what it did to them. But that's not all. It also transformed childhood. If I were to fill this audience, let's say this side with you guys and this side with a bunch of young people living in, say, school children living in Las Vegas, and you were to tell these young school children about your summer vacation, what did you do on your summer vacation? Nothing. In fact, in American English, there's a sentence that has literally disappeared. The sentence is, go play. And the rest of the sentence, which you never heard because you were too fast, was, or I'll give you something to do. If you talk to the kids on this side, they'd be like, what? You didn't go to practice? You didn't have lessons? You didn't have rehearsals? We weren't getting tutored? You didn't have band camp? And you'd say, no, we mainly just threw rocks in the creek. That's what we did. That was our summer. that amplification of adulthood has corrupted, in very significant degree, corrupted childhood. And so children are increasingly measured according to the standards of adulthood. And they are judged by those standards. But that's not all. This magnification of adulthood has also corrupted elderhood. This time of life that exists beyond adulthood, that takes us past the fever of adulthood and introduces us to a slower, deeper, more connected way of living. That's been corrupted. And we can see this corruption in a simple bit of language. It's commonly used and expresses this adultification of elderhood. The word, you all know it, I consider it to be the dirtiest 5-letter word. The word is still. And you know how this game is played, because actually every single one of us in this room has played it. Here's how it goes. You're talking to some friends. Da-da-da-da-da. Oh, yeah, you know, my dad, he's 84, and he drives. Pretty good, huh? But there's always somebody who has to top it. My Aunt Myrtle, she's 88, and she drives to work every day. And then somebody always has a great-granddad who's 94, just got back from climbing K2. And he's in Florida because he loves to water ski. Barefoot. In the nude. Now, when people play the still game, what they're really saying is this older person is admirable because they haven't changed. That what they're remarking upon is what a good thing it is to live decades of your life without changing. That's what still says. And what we see when we take these English sentences and pull still out, we realize it's entirely a cultural signifier that has no linguistic value. My dad's 84. He drives. My Aunt Myrtle's 88. She drives to work every day. The word serves no purpose other than to punish and discipline older people by signaling to them, you are worthy only to the degree that you emulate the behavior, the productivity, the effectiveness, the efficiency, the independence of young people. And that is a horrifying miscarriage of justice in our society. We need older people to be old. That's the whole idea. And yet we teach millions of older people to ape the behaviors and manners of young people so that they can escape the worst of the prejudice that is directed against them. It's terrible. And in fact, to see how out of place this is and how wrong it is, let's play the still game at the other end of the life cycle. What if you had a 14-year-old son, call him Bobby, and you're talking to a friend and you're like, oh yeah, you know, Bobby, he has a blankie. And the person you're talking to be like, what? You said he was 14. Yeah, he's had a blankie for like 12 years. You're like, that's not right. People are supposed to change. It's hard to imagine thinking of an educational program or a healthcare program for children that was designed to keep them from changing. Imagine sending your kids to school and the goal is they don't grow. Going to the doctor. Doc, I'm a little worried he's an inch taller. That's bad, right? But in the context of how we talk about and deal with older people, that's exactly what we do. We think of ways to help people not change. And we do it because we enlarge and transform the true negative age-related changes and turn them into terrible monsters. And in doing so, cut ourselves off from the goodness, the richness, and the wonder and the value of that older brain. It's the most precious natural resource we have available, to us. Don't know what I did there, but okay, so I can't finish my little talk here tonight with you without talking about the circumstances of living that are commonly referred to in our culture and society as dementia. You've heard of it. I remember years ago being on a lecture tour, and I was giving a public lecture in Anchorage, Alaska. So that sounds really great and fun. It was January, okay? So I'm invited to give a talk in Anchorage in January, and I'm there, and I gave a talk, and just one line, a throwaway line in my lecture was, I talked about the tragedy of Alzheimer's, okay? After the talk, I'm by the stage, and I'm visiting with people, and a young woman comes up to me, Native Alaskan woman, and she says, you know, Dr. Thomas, I heard you mention the tragedy of Alzheimer's, and I want you to know that in my village, we don't think of it that way. That those elders, we think of them as being blessed, having a blessing on them, because they can see the spirit world and they can see this world at the same time. And that's something none of the rest of us can do. And then she went on to explain about an elder of her village talking about her mom, and saying her mom was going to come and be with her and see her. She was looking forward to her mom comforting her. And in American society, and I'm exaggerating for effect, but in American society, it's more like, no, your mom's dead. But in this village, they look at that person and say, that's incredible. Your mom's been gone 20 years. And here she is in contact with her and with us at the same time. So I'm a geriatrician, and I talk to this woman, I get back on the airplane, I fly home, and I go to work. And my practice has always focused on the most old, the most frail people. That's the kind of geriatrician I am. I focus on the people who are the oldest of the old and the frailest of the frail. That's been my focus, which I've very much enjoyed. And so I go to work and I start looking at the people that I'm caring for and start looking at them as being gifted. And at first it feels strange and weird because I'm a doctor. I saw the pickled brain in the jar, This is your brain on Alzheimer's, okay? I have that image in my head, and yet I have this human being in front of me who is not a pickled brain in a jar. This is a human being. And I begin to wonder if I changed how I acted, would they change how they act? So I began to care for people as if it was my honor to be in the presence of and to help support the needs of people who were specially gifted. Again, this sounds weird, but let's look at a couple of things. Conventional understanding of dementia puts a lot of emphasis on memory, right? So people living with dementia are thought to be losing their memory. That's one way of talking about it. And I get to thinking, memory, okay, that's a good thing. But there's another thing that's also very good. It's called forgetting. And anybody who's ever been married knows the value of forgetting. If you can't forget, you basically can't be married. Mandatory. So it turns out, and I won't go into the details because it's a beautiful piece to discover on your own if you choose. It turns out forgetting is closely related to forgiveness. And forgiveness is a very deeply spiritual act. So I get to thinking about people who can forget, can forgive, and they can live their life without some of the burdens that they carried as younger people. Then I get to thinking about what's often said about people living with dementia, that they're kind of in this moment. They say to you, did you close the door? And you're like, yes, I closed the door. 5 minutes later, did you close the door? Okay, they're in this moment, not that moment, this moment. And I realized that there are entire religions, world religions, dedicated to helping people live in the moment. And here are these people doing it effortlessly and beautifully. And when they're distressed, I learned in my practice, they're very often distressed because we're making them live in a way that's not consistent with the brain they have. A lot of what we call behavior or these clinical difficulties are us messing with people who are uniquely talented and making their life difficult. And how much can we learn about forgetting and forgiveness, about being in the moment, from the people who are all around us? I gave a little talk about that once, and a physician came up to me afterward. You find the most interesting things after you give a lecture. And he was like, that's really nice, very uplifting, thank you. But what about that person who's at the end stage? What about that person who just doesn't talk, doesn't move, can't turn over in bed? You can't possibly tell me that there's any worth or value in that person's life. And I had to reflect and I had to think. And I came to an understanding of a truth of my medical practice. That in fact, those people, the ones he was describing, had been my greatest teachers. My greatest teachers. I will tell you, as a physician, it's a relatively easy thing to be kind and gentle to somebody who's like, oh, Dr. Thomas, you're so nice. What's it like to be kind and gentle to someone who does not know your name, is never going to know your name, is never going to remember your visit, and isn't going to speak to you? What if I practice compassion and tenderness and forgiveness and gentleness in the presence of that teacher? What can I learn by a soul who has remained with us in a body that is a withered husk? Stayed here with us to teach without words, to teach without language, to teach without reservation, to give the greatest gift a human being can possibly give, to teach others how to practice compassion. And then I think about the people I work with, the people who commit their lives to the well-being of elders living with what we call dementia. And I realize that these people are guarding a door. And they stand beside this door and they protect it. And they say, even in the most difficult circumstances, I love you. I'll care for you. I'll be with you. My touch will be tender. My words will be gentle. And they guard this door because do you know what's on the other side of that door? It's a horror. A world in which people are worthy only of their production, of their skill, of their talent, of their effectiveness. These caregivers stand by that door and they say, no. This is a beautiful human being, and it's my gift and my pleasure and my honor to care for her. That is a long ways away from silly birthday cards about turning 50. Thank you very much. Okay, so Peter, we're going to do questions.
Yep.
I have a few minutes to do questions. Would you like that? Okay, happy to do that. Does anybody have a question or comment? Yes, sir. Yes, I'll repeat it, and I think they're getting a mic.
Well, there's some in the center there.
Oh, come to the center, if it pleases you. Yes, sir. Congratulations. Do you have the channel on? Go ahead. Listen, we have an expert coming up. You know, the thing about these mics is they make them hard to turn off accidentally. That makes them hard to turn on. Yes, I will.
Check one. There we go. How about that?
Here we go.
Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir.
You forgot the question?
No. Thanks. Does a healthy acknowledgement of elderhood necessarily involve a knowing waiver of the principles of adulthood?
I think it's most effective when it is a knowing transformation and that people can feel themselves stretching to a new way of living. I think it's less effective, although it does happen, when people just sort of, with their eyes closed, feel their way into it. I just think people like leaving childhood. It's better and easier if you have a clear picture of the destination.
When do you know that you're leaving adulthood and entering elderhood?
You know when you find yourself asking, why am I still doing this? When that question comes into your mind, it's a little bit of a tickle that's saying there may be something more. There may be another way of living. You know, many adults, and I'm one of them at this point, spend long stretches pulling, pushing, working, and they actually eliminate from their thinking the idea that there could be another way of living, partly out of necessity. Elderhood is knocking on your door when you begin to say, I don't have to keep doing this. And how you answer and where you go and what you do entirely your journey. But that's often the first sign.
Is there anything wrong with trying to hold on to adulthood as long as possible?
Yes.
And what is it?
Well, let me just tell you. If you have a child and the child is unwilling or unable to reach adulthood, we have a name for that. It's called developmental disability. And if an adult can't or won't leave adulthood, they are in some ways disabled. And I say they're disabled because they're not rising to their highest function. Look, a 75-year-old adult is kind of a loser. A 75-year-old can't work as hard or do as much as a 45-year-old adult. A 75-year-old elder is just starting to get things figured out and is on a different path and a different journey. So holding on to adulthood actually delays growth. Now, that said, there's nothing wrong with holding on to your muscle strength, your balance, your mental capacity, your ability to have a healthy mind, a healthy brain. That's all good. But it's good because it's good for elderhood, not because it helps you pretend like you're an adult when you're not.
Are there any types of telltale signs that let you know that you're leaving adulthood and entering elderhood?
Physically, not so much. However, I will tell you one interesting thing about elders. Elder men, they rarely start fights in bars. That's a sign right there that
You're past it.
you're pretty much edging into elderhood. Yeah. Thank you.
Turn this over to my
Question?
Questions?
Oh, do we have a question? Oh, here, we have one in back, right here. Thank you, sir.
Is this work? Yes, it's working. Coming from a family that has been raked with Alzheimer's through all my aunts and uncles and
Yes.
first cousins, and my mother, I can't see how at the end you said, I don't understand why I just can't get it out.
Yes, ma'am.
Why do we have these places where they're warehouses of people waiting to die, and we're not really learning anything from them, and they're putting the families through such strain and strife?
Yes, ma'am.
There has to be another way.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you for saying that out loud. And I think you and I are both nursing home abolitionists. Okay? We should not be institutionalizing people, often against their will, when their only crime is a neurologic condition that is outside of their control. There are ways to help people live meaningful lives outside of an institution. What has happened in the past is our society and culture has had the idea that there's nothing you can do. There's nothing that can be done. So it doesn't matter if 1.6 million people go to bed at night in a nursing home, because what can be done? That's a consequence of an ageist society. And when we conquer ageism, we'll be conquering these ageist practices like the mass institutionalization of older people.
But what is actually being done for the future generation that's coming up to that point?
Well, I did not focus on it tonight because it was a different purpose for this talk, but myself and several of the people in this audience are leaders of a movement that's designed to challenge those circumstances that you talked about. And we're developing new language and new education and new models of care that are not institutional and not warehousing.
Thank you.
And if you would like to read about two of them, you can, one is called the Eden Alternative, and one is called the Green House.
Okay.
So
Thank you.
You're welcome, ma'am. Blessings to you. Yes, ma'am.
Maybe we'll take one more.
One more question. Perfect. Okay.
This is actually a comment.
Good.
First, I want to thank you for your poignant words, the last minutes
Thank you.
of this, because you're right on to honor and respect the grace in that person and the years and wisdom of that person. And having lived 12 years with my own late husband of frontal lobe dementia, I totally relate to that.
Yes, ma'am.
But what struck me also in your talk is how frequently that word still is in the conversation of those of us over 65. If we talk about someone in their 50s, we don't say, oh, do you know Bob goes and works out for 2 hours a day? No, but at 80, do you know Bob still works out? And is there the relationship because of this culture and value of independence and the value of being independent, not being part of needing community?
Yes.
Do you see that
I do.
relationship?
If I could say one thing, and we'll close the program with this. Thank you for that observation. The mythology of independence is a whip that is used to lash older people. It's a cruel illusion. It bears no semblance to the other parts of our life where we are clearly and frankly and obviously dependent on other people at every stage of our life. And then in, let's say, our 80s, we're held to the standard of being independent at a moment where it is really not well suited to our well-being. So this mythology of independence, and I could close here, just say that this is where we need to get aging unhooked from, get aging connected to the whole lifespan and not see, oh, I was living a fine life and then I started aging. No, you're going to live a whole life and aging is going to be a big part of it and dependence is going to be a big part of it, and our language should respect and honor that at each stage, because it is honestly elders who are exclusively stigmatized by evidence of a lack of independence. So with that, thank you for bringing me here and sharing this room with me.
Thank you so much, Dr. Thomas. And I would actually invite everyone to stay in their seats for just a moment and give Dr. Thomas an opportunity to get to the back of the room before you start hitting him up with questions, because they are going to be selling copies of his new book, Second Wind, in the back, and he'll be doing a book signing for those, and so we want to give him a chance to get settled. I talk a lot about these issues as well, and after listening to Dr. Thomas tonight, it's like, well, I don't have anything to add to that. It says closing remarks in the program, but I have nothing to say. Except I will point out that I hadn't heard before that 47 was the unhappiest age of our life. And I guess my wife and I have that to look forward to, and then we'll forget it, right? After that. I do want to take a quick moment to thank Dr. Cummings and the Lou Ruvo Center Institute here very much for hosting us and having this event. Also want to thank Nicole Wolf, David Watts, Gina Sinclair with the Cleveland Clinic for all of their efforts in making this event successful. And I want to thank the team from UNR and the School of Medicine as well, Audrey Goodnight and Rochelle O'Driscoll, Colette Witt. They're the folks that really on our end helped to organize this and bring it to fruition in a way to make it a true success. And again, I want to thank each and every one of you for coming out, and I have no doubt that it was both informational and compelling, and hopefully help to shift the way that you're looking at aging, not only in our society, but also in your own life. And so I look forward to having a chance to talk with each of you as we move forward. And so now please join me again in thanking everyone that made this a success, and Dr. Thomas, and go back and see him at the book signing.